Hi folks, this is Andrew, and in this video we're going to look at the intrinsic muscles of the foot. Okay, so these are the muscles that are only like distal to the ankle joint. Yeah, their origins and insertions are all within the foot itself. Yeah, obviously you've got loads of muscles that act on the foot which come from higher up. Yeah, all of your compartments of the leg, anterior compartment, posterior compartment, lateral compartment, they all act on the foot, but because they come from higher up, we call them the extrinsic muscles of the foot. The intrinsic ones, just in the foot itself. Okay, this is quite a fiddly one. There's a lot of content here. There's a lot of muscles. So yeah, I'm going to be quite conservative with the level of detail here. We'll just treat this as very much like a basic overview of all of these muscles, because I'm not convinced there's much need to know more than the basics unless you want to be a foot surgeon. Yeah. Okay, so if we talk about the basics to build on for this one, number one. The intrinsic muscles of the foot, technically they are all going to act on the toes. They all act to move the toes of the foot. In reality, the more important role of these muscles is they act together to support the overall architecture of the foot. Yeah, so you've got the arches of the foot, yeah, medial longitudinal arch, lateral longitudinal arch, transverse arch, which is sort of built by the bones, but then the muscles help to contribute to sort of the supporting structures that maintain those arches and like transmit force and pressure through those arches when we're walking or running. Yeah, so that's the real job of these muscles. It's sort of, yeah, maintaining structure and support of the foot. Number two, the intrinsic muscles of the foot can be divided up into dorsal muscles, which lie over the top of the bones, superior to the bones of the foot, and then plantar muscles, which are inferior to the bones of the foot. So dorsal on top, plantar underneath. Number three, the dorsal muscles are really easy. There's only two of them to know about, and if you're happy with this idea of every muscle called longus has to have a brevis, then if you know your muscles of the anterior leg, you can predict the muscles that are going to be on the dorsal side of the foot, yeah, just by knowing that every longus has to have a brevis counterpart. Okay, so that's the dorsal layer. Number four, the plantar layer is the tricky one. Yeah, there's loads of muscles underneath the bones of the foot. They're arranged into 4 layers. And yeah, for the life of me, I'm still relying on mnemonics and things like that to try and remember which muscles go into which layers. Yeah, so I'll take you through the mnemonic that I use, the memory system that I use, and hopefully that can be helpful for people. Yeah, and then finally number 5, innervation. So all of the dorsal muscles of the foot are all innervated by the deep fibular nerve, which is the same nerve that innervates the anterior leg. And all of the plantar muscles are innervated by your plantar nerves, which are branches of the tibial nerve, which supplies the posterior leg. It's, like I said, it's a bit of a fiddly one, bit of a tricky one, but we'll try and keep the level of detail as superficial as possible. Okay. Good start, isn't it? Okay, as ever, just before we get into the muscles themselves, just a quick note about functions. So, sort of said that the role of these muscles, most importantly, is just to support the architecture of the foot itself. The names of these muscles will talk about what they specifically do to the toes, yeah, because these muscles do all act on the toes. So we just got to be very clear about what movements we can do with our toes, yeah. So we've already, if you've watched the videos I did on the compartments of the leg, the anterior compartment and the posterior compartment of the leg, then we already know that we can plantarflex and dorsiflex our toes. So remember, plantarflexion of the toes is true flexion of the toes, and that's curling your toes downwards. Yeah, and then dorsiflexion, which is true extension of the toes, is pulling your toes back towards you. Yeah, so plantarflexion is curling them down, dorsiflexion is pulling them up. Flexion, extension. Yeah. The other thing you can do with your toes is you can abduct them and adduct them. Yeah, so effectively abduction is splaying your toes apart, spreading your toes apart as much as possible, and then adduction is pulling them back together. Yeah, so they're the main things that you can do with your toes. Obviously, as bipedal animals, we don't use our toes nearly as much as we use our hands anymore. So we very rarely rely on those movements a lot. But you could argue that sort of plantar flexion of the big toe, so, you know, gripping the floor with your big toes, has a big role to play in sort of maintaining balance and things like that. So there are roles to play here, but yeah, just keep in mind those movements of the toes, yeah? Plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, abduction, adduction, because then the names of the muscles will make sense. Okay? Okay, let's have a look at some of these muscles then. Yeah, so we're going to start off with the dorsal muscles of the foot. Yeah, so the ones that are on top of the bones of the foot. Like I said, these are much easier because there's only 2 of them to know about. Okay, so in order to, we can see if we can try and arrive at the conclusion of what these muscles are going to be called sort of naturally. Yeah, so if they're on the top of the foot, yeah, these muscles are going to insert onto the top of the toes. Okay, so if these muscles contract, they are going to pull the toes upwards, yeah, because they're inserting onto the top of them. So of all of the movements of the toes that we discussed a second ago, yeah, dorsiflexion or extension, yeah, is going to be what these muscles do. Okay, so already we can make an educated guess that these muscles are going to be called extensor. Yeah, the other point that I made right at the start of the video is just remember, if you ever have a muscle that's called longus, there's likely to be a brevis somewhere. There has to be a brevis somewhere. You wouldn't call a muscle long unless there was a muscle that did the same thing that was shorter somewhere else. Yeah, you wouldn't call it longus otherwise, okay? So if we know that these muscles are called extensor, we can then have a bit of a think about any other muscles we know about that are also called extensor that are called longus, yeah? And if we go back to the anterior compartment of the leg, yeah, the muscles that run down the front of the shin, we had extensor digitorum longus, yeah, which was the long extensor of the 4 toes, and extensor hallucis longus, which was the long extensor of the big toe. Yeah, these were the 2 extensor muscles in that compartment. So true to form, if they're called longus, there has to be a brevis. Yeah, so that gives us the 2 dorsal muscles in the intrinsic. We've got extensor digitorum brevis, and then extensor hallucis brevis. Yeah, because both of these have a longus counterpart in the anterior compartment of the leg. And we know that they do the same thing because they both run over the top of the foot. So they're going to pull the toes up. They're going to dorsiflex or extend the toes, yeah? So these are our 2 on the dorsal layer of the foot, okay? Now, the names give you a good idea about where the insertions are going to be, yeah? We know that extensor hallucis brevis is going to have to insert onto the big toe, and we know that extensor digitorum brevis is going to have to insert onto the other 4. Yeah, so then it's just a question of where's the origin of these muscles, okay? So just to go through this, yeah, this is a superior view of the foot, yeah, we're looking down at the top of the foot. Obviously this is very much a schematic, sort of blocky, sort of just general representation of what we're looking at. But we have got the talus, which is the bone that contributes to the ankle joint. The talus is sat on top of the calcaneum, which is the bone that makes up the heel. Yeah, if this side is medial and this side is lateral, yeah, we've then got the 2 bones that are in front of the talus and the calcaneum. On the medial side, it is the navicular. On the lateral side, it is the cuboid. Okay, and then the navicular will attach to your 3 cuneiforms. And remember, you've got a medial cuneiform, intermediate and lateral cuneiform. And then the cuneiforms and the cuboid attach directly to the metatarsals. Yeah, each cuneiform will attach to metatarsals 1, 2 and 3. Metatarsal. Yeah, the cuboid articulates directly with metatarsals 4 and 5. And then you've got the phalanges. Yeah, the big toe only has 2 phalanges, proximal phalanx and distal phalanx. The other 4 toes have 3 phalanges, proximal, middle and distal. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to sort of look at it from above. Okay. So in terms of the origin of these two, so we know they have to come off the foot because they're intrinsic muscles of the foot, yeah? The origin for both of these is right at the front of the calcaneum. Yeah, it is this space here. Okay, so for both of these, we'll do, let's do digitorum brevis first. Digitorum brevis, the origin is going to be coming off of here. Yeah, and then digitorum brevis is going to eventually, so it's going to have a, you know, let's give it a bit of a muscle bulk, sort of like this. But then eventually it's going to give off 4 tendons to go off to these 4 toes, yeah? And actually, the true insertion site of those tendons is they blend with the other tendons coming from extensor digitorum longus, yeah? So if I sort of represent that, we've got a tendon coming down here, tendon coming down here, tendon coming down here, tendon coming down here, yeah? These effectively blend, they join the tendons that have come all the way down from the shin of extensor digitorum longus to essentially become single insertion sites onto the phalanges of the toes. Okay? So that is extensor digitorum brevis. Okay? Extensor hallucis brevis, same origin site, it's coming off the front of the calcaneum, so literally just about here. Yeah, and then again a short muscle bulk, and then it has a tendon that goes down to specifically the proximal phalanx of the big toe. Yeah, so there's a difference here because extensor hallucis longus coming down from the shin goes all the way to the distal phalanx. Brevis only goes as far as the proximal phalanx because it's shorter. Okay, and they don't blend together in the same way that these do. Yeah, they are, brevis and longus for the big toe are 2 completely separate things. Okay, but that's these 2 muscles done. That's the dorsal muscles done. So they both come off quite laterally. Yeah, they come off the calcaneum on the lateral side of the foot. Remember, any muscle that acts on your big toe, despite the big toe being a very medial structure, all the muscles come off laterally. Yeah. But both of these come off laterally, and then extensor digitorum brevis will give off 4 tendons which blend with the tendons of extensor digitorum longus to insert onto the 4 toes, and then extensor hallucis brevis will insert onto the proximal phalanx of the big toe to aid in extension of the big toe. Yeah, with longus coming all the way down to the distal one. And that's that. Yeah, that's it for the dorsal layer, okay? Now, because these muscles, they're all extending, they're all dorsiflexing, they almost belong in the anterior compartment of the leg, don't they? Certainly their counterparts, their longest counterparts, are both in the anterior compartment of the leg. So if you keep that sort of connection in mind, it then makes sense that these 2 muscles are also innervated by the deep fibular nerve. Yeah, because that was the nerve that supplied the anterior compartment of the leg. These muscles are effectively doing the same thing, so it makes sense that they're all innervated by the same nerve. So it's the deep fibular nerve that innervates both these muscles. Okay? Right, that's the easy bit done. Let's have a look at the plantar side. Okay, so the plantar muscles of the foot. Yeah, so the majority of the intrinsic muscles of the foot are in this plantar layer. They're underneath the bones of the foot, okay? Yeah, a lot of muscles to learn about here. They're arranged into 4 layers, and we're going to do them 1 layer at a time, okay? So, what order am I going to do this? All right, let's do the mnemonic first, because I think, yeah, then we can sort of explain it as we go through. So, I have a way in which I remember the layers of the foot and the muscles that go into each layer. It works for me. It might not work for anyone else, but it's all I've got to give you. Okay, so the layers of the foot, the way that I remember it, it basically revolves around 4 hand signals. Yeah, and your 4 hand signals are telephone sign, keeping the volume down, Scout's honour, and then live long and prosper. Okay, they're my 4 hand signals, and you can come up with a mnemonic to remember those. You can come up with a story. I think I had a story about watching TV and my phone rang, so I asked my flatmates to keep the volume down. They promised that they would, and then told me to live long and prosper, or something like that. But those are the 4 hand signals that we're going to use here. Just very quickly before we dive into that, so I'm hoping we can sort of figure out I'm representing a foot with the hand. Yeah, your hand is a foot. Okay, just be very clear, the movements that we do with our fingers are the equivalent movements of what we would do with the toes. Yeah, so for example, when we do the first layer, so telephone signal, so we are flexing our middle fingers, yeah, and then we are spreading our little finger out to the side and our thumb out to the side. Now, true movements of the thumb, that is extension. That's extension of the thumb. But if this was a foot, moving the big toe out to the side would be abduction. And it's abduction that I want you to think of when we do that movement. Okay, so just, it will make more sense as I go through it, but the movements that I describe doing with the thumb aren't technically the movements that you are doing with your thumb, it's the movements that you would be doing if it was a big toe. Clear as mud. Okay, cool. So let's dive in with layer 1. Where's my pen gone? Okay, so this is the first layer, and the first layer is the most superficial layer. So if you're looking at the underside, if you're looking at the sole of someone's foot, these are going to be the first muscles that you come across, okay? So these are all inferior views now of the foot. Instead of looking down at the foot from above, we're looking up from below, okay? So again, we've got the calcaneum at the back, making up the heel. Yeah, you can't really see the talus from underneath because the talus is superior, forming the ankle joint, yeah? So you can't really see it. But then we've got our cuboid, on the lateral side, cuboid, cuboid. We've got our navicular on the medial side, navicular, navicular. The navicular is attached to the 3 cuneiforms, medial, intermediate, and lateral, and then the cuneiforms and the cuboid all attached to the metatarsals, and then the metatarsals attached to the phalanges. Yeah. See if you can guess what order I drew these in, because I think they get progressively more shit as I went through. But yeah, so this is the inferior view of the bones of the foot, okay? So the first layer is the most superficial layer, so it's the most inferior layer. And our first hand signal is phone sign, yeah, making a phone sign. So in terms of the movements that you would have to do with your toes in order to make a phone sign, you have to flex your digits and then abduct your little finger out to the side and abduct your big toe out to the side. That's what you have to do to make a phone signal. So then just think, what if you had the choice to name muscles to do those 3 things, what would you name them? Well, the ones to flex the digits, you would probably call them flexor digitorum, and because we're intrinsic, it's going to be the shorter one, isn't it? Flexor digitorum brevis. We're then going to abduct the little toe out to the side, so we're going to call it abductor digiti minimi, or minimi, and then we're going to abduct the big toe is hallucis, so we've got abductor hallucis. Yeah, and they're your 3. They're your 3 in the first layer. So think about making your phone sign, and they're the muscles at work, okay? So let's just, I've not given myself a lot of room for writing things here. Okay, we'll just draw them on. So first things first, we've got, let's do flexor digitorum brevis. Flexor digitorum brevis is going to be coming off the underside of the heel, yeah, the inferior surface of the calcaneum. Yeah, and then nice and simply is going to go off to the 4 toes. Yeah, it's going to go off to the 4 toes like that. Nice and easy. Yeah? Next up, we've got, let's say, abductor digiti minimi. Okay, so this is going to be one that's pulling the little toe out to the side, yeah? Again, comes off the calcaneum. And it's just going to go up to insert onto the lateral aspect of, oh, which phalanx is it? Middle phalanx? I'll have to check. If that's wrong, I'll put something up on the screen somewhere. I think it's the middle phalanx. So going up here to insert onto the lateral side of the little toe, so that when it contracts, it pulls the little toe out. Yeah? And then finally, abductor hallucis, referring to the big toe. Yeah, abductor again comes off the calcaneum. And because this is going to be pulling the big toe medially, it has to insert onto the medial side of the big toe, yeah? So this is going to come up here to insert onto the medial side of the proximal phalanx of the big toe. Okay, and that's your first layer done. Yeah, so nice and easy, all three of them come off the calcaneum. And then just think about making that phone sign. Flex the digits with flexor digitorum brevis, abduct your little finger with abductor digiti minimi, and then abduct your big toe with abductor hallucis. Yeah? I'm hoping you're starting to see the method to my madness here. Let's keep going. Okay, layer two. So this is the second layer. So you can imagine if you peeled all of this first layer off, the second layer would be the next layer that you see, yeah? And our hand movement for the second layer was keeping the volume down. So just to be clear, you are making a right angle between your metacarpals of your hand and your phalanges of your hand. Just imagine doing the same thing with your feet, yeah? So this is the movement, this right angle, okay? Now, technically you do need to have a bit of background here to make this work, yeah? The first thing that this will make you do is make you think of right angles. Right angles should make you think of quadrilaterals. There is a muscle in the second layer of the foot called quadratus plantar. Yeah, quadratus plantar being a quadrilateral muscle, yeah? So if you make that right angle with your hand, that should remind you, oh, quadrilaterals, quadratus plantar. That's the first muscle in this layer. The other thing that this should make you think of is, it depends on whether you've studied hand anatomy yet or not, but that movement of your fingers, so we're talking of a flexion of the metacarpophalangeal joint, but maintaining extension of the interphalangeal joints. This movement is caused by a series of muscles in the hand called the lumbricals. And your lumbricals are like your sock puppet muscles. That's the movement that they do, yeah? You also have lumbricals in your foot. So it's just occurred to me that actually if you've not done hand anatomy, then that probably wouldn't come naturally to you. But the take home is that movement, flexion of the, in the context of the foot, flexion of the metatarsophalangeal joint, whilst maintaining extension in the interphalangeal joint, is caused by a set of muscles called the lumbricals. Okay, and that's the second layer, yeah? Quadratus plantar, formed from our right angles, and then the lumbricals that do that movement there. Okay, so putting that up on the board. Okay. I was going to talk about that at the end, but I don't think I can. Okay, fine. No, that's all right. We'll talk about it now. Okay, I'm all over the place here. So the other thing, so those are the muscles. Those are the intrinsic muscles to know about in the second layer of the foot, yeah? The other thing to look for in the second layer of the foot is some of the tendons of our leg muscles. Yeah, if you've watched the video that I did on the posterior compartment of the leg, so Tom, Dick and Harry and all of those sorts of plantar flexor muscles, you'll remember that a lot of those tendons end up running underneath the foot in order to get to their insertion sites. So obviously those tendons have to appear somewhere within these four layers, and for two of those muscles it is the second layer that we see them. So I'm actually going to put those on first. Let me do those in blue. So the two muscles, the two tendons from the leg compartment that we see in the second layer are going to be the two flexor longuses. Yeah, so flexor hallucis longus and flexor digitorum longus. Obviously the muscles themselves are on the back of the calf, aren't they? But the tendons, once they go underneath the medial malleolus, we'll see the tendons in this layer of the foot. So if I just put those in now, so obviously they've entered medially, and then flexor hallucis longus is just going to go straight to the distal phalanx of the big toe. yeah, and then flexor digitorum longus comes over here and then splits into its 4 tendons like that. Yeah, so that is flexor hallucis longus and flexor digitorum longus. Okay, so those tendons are also present in the second layer. The reason I've had to talk about that now is actually because the muscles that we talked about insert and come off these tendons. Yeah, so we did have to sort of put them on first. So if we let's do quadratus plantar first. So quadratus plantar. Okay, so quadratus plantar is a muscle that again comes off the underside of the calcaneum. Yeah, so it's going to come off here. And then the insertion site of quadratus plantar is actually the tendon of flexor digitorum longus. Yeah, so as the name suggests, it's a big blocky quadrilateral sort of muscle. But it inserts onto the tendon of flexor digitorum longus. So if we actually think about what this muscle is going to do when it contracts, all it really does is it helps pull on the tendon that's pulling on the 4 digits. So its role is aiding flexion of the 4 toes. Yeah, because it inserts onto the tendon. So when it shortens, the tendon's going to get pulled. Yeah? Cool. And then, last but not least, if we've got the lumbricals. So there's going to be a lumbrical for each of the 4 toes, and the origin of the lumbricals is again flexor digitorum longus. So you look at the 4 tendons that go off to each of the toes. Each of those tendons is an origin site for a lumbrical. Yeah, it's going to come off the tendon and then just inserts onto the medial side of each of the 4 lateral toes, like that. Yeah, and its job, the lumbrical's job, is to flex the metatarsophalangeal joint whilst maintaining extension. So instead of full flexion all the way through, it bends this joint whilst keeping this joint straight for these lateral 4 toes. Okay, so that's the second layer, quadratus plantar and the lumbricals. In order to know the origins and insertions of both of those, you have to understand that, at the very least, flexor digitorum longus, the tendon is travelling within this layer as well. And just remember to make your right angle, keep the volume down. Yeah, that's the hand signal to maybe think of these 2. Okay, layer number 3, third layer. So the third layer of the foot, in terms of our hand movements, it was Scout's honour. Yeah, hopefully we're all happy with that hand gesture. Yeah, so again, thinking about the movements that we have to do to make a Scout's honour sign. First things first, we've got to flex the little toe. We then have to flex the big toe and then adduct the big toe. Yeah, like I said, that's not actually what we're doing with our thumb, but in the context of a big toe, that's what we would be doing. Yeah, so flex the little finger, flex the thumb, adduct the thumb. And that's how you make the Scout's honour sign. So again, if you have free rein to name muscles to do that, flexing the little toe would be flexor digiti minimi. Flexing the thumb, or flexing the big toe would be flexor hallucis brevis, because there's already a flexor hallucis longus. Yeah. And then adduction of the big toe would just be adductor or adductor hallucis. And there are 3 muscles in the third layer. Yeah, flexor digiti minimi, flexor hallucis brevis, adductor hallucis. Nice and easy. Okay, so coming over here then, let's do flexor digiti minimi first. I don't know if it's minimi or minimi. I think I do both. Flexor digiti minimi, flexor digiti minimi. I don't know. Flex this one, yeah, FDM. So FDM is going to be coming off the, where does it come off? It comes off the base of the fifth metatarsal. So far, a lot of these have been quite far back, yeah, they've come off the calcaneum itself, yeah. We're moving a bit further forward with these sort of slightly deeper ones, yeah. So flexor digiti minimi comes off the base of the fifth metatarsal and will basically just go straight up to insert onto the distal phalanx of the fifth toe. Nice and easy to cause flexion. Yeah, so that was nice and easy. Next up we have got flexor hallucis brevis. Yeah, because remember flexor hallucis longus was up here, wasn't it? It's part of the posterior leg, so this is the brevis counterpart. For every longus there has to be a brevis. So flexor hallucis brevis, again slightly more anterior in its origin. Flexor hallucis brevis sort of comes off the cuboid and like the lateral cuneiform bone, so it's sort of all around here, really, yeah. And then truciform, because it's the brevis, this one doesn't go as far as the distal phalanx of the big toe, it will only go as far as the proximal phalanx of the big toe, so it's sort of going across there. But again, its job is just going to be to bend, to aid in the flexion of the big toe. So that is going to be flexor hallucis brevis. And then last but not least, we've done 1, 2, we now need to adduct, yeah, so adductor hallucis is the last one. Adductor hallucis. Now this is a weird one. Adductor hallucis has got two parts to it. It's got an oblique part and a transverse part. The oblique, let me get this right. Yeah, the oblique part of adductor hallucis is going to come off sort of your middle metatarsals, so it's going to come off sort of around here-ish, and then just nips across to insert onto the proximal phalanx of the big toe. The transverse part of adductor hallucis comes from, as the name suggests, all the way across, sort of around like the final metatarso phalangeal joint, and sort of then comes in to meet it like that. Yeah, and you can sort of see that between those two, it's going to have a strong movement in pulling the big toe that way. Yeah, pulling it laterally, which is adduction, isn't it? Yeah, it's going to be adduction of the toe. Okay, so yeah, adductor hallucis has got an oblique head and a transverse head. They both insert onto the proximal phalanx of the big toe, and the role is adduction. Okay, and that's the third layer done. Yeah, flexor digiti minimi, flexor hallucis brevis, and adductor hallucis. Scout's honour. Okay, and last but not least, we have got the fourth layer, the deepest layer. Yeah, fourth layer. Okay, we're getting there. I hope this is making sense. I hope I'm not rambling. But yeah, there's a fourth layer, the deepest layer. So our last movement was live long and prosper. Yeah, so we had telephone for the first layer, we had keep the volume down for the second, we had Scout's honour for the third, and we've got live long and prosper for the fourth. Now again, now that I'm saying it out loud, you do have to have a bit of background in hand anatomy in order to understand why this is relevant. Live long and prosper is basically just to make you think about abducting the fingers, abducting and adducting. Yeah, so spreading and putting them back together. Yeah. Now in the hand, the muscles that are primarily responsible for abducting and adducting the fingers are your interossei muscles. Yeah, and you had palmar interossei muscles for bringing the fingers back together, and you had dorsal interossei muscles for spreading the fingers apart. It was dab the pad. Yeah, dab, dorsal for abduction, pad, palmar for adduction. The foot is exactly the same, is the take-home message here, yeah? So the muscles of the fourth layer, we're exclusively talking about the interossei muscles. The interossei muscles are going to just be for abducting and adducting the toes, and the same as with the hand, you can still use dab the pad. There's going to be dorsal interossei muscles, which are pretty much so deep they're basically on top of the foot, yeah, and they're going to be responsible for spreading the toes. And then plantar interossei muscles rather than palmar, yeah, plantar, which are going to be slightly more inferior, which are responsible for bringing the toes back together. Okay, so that's dab the pad, and this is, yeah, these are all going to be the interossei muscles. So first things first, let's do the plantar interossei. So it's P for pad, yeah, so plantar adduct, so these are going to be pulling the toes towards the big toe, yeah, and the plantar interossei muscles only found on the lateral toes, so sort of the 3rd to 5th toes. So they're basically going to be coming off the metatarsals, the medial side of metatarsals 3, 4 and 5, and then they basically are just going to insert onto the medial side of these toes so that when they contract, the toes get pulled inwards. Yeah, so that's the plantar interossei. There's only 3 of those. Yeah, and then the dorsal interossei muscles. Interossei. There's 4 of those. They're going to be responsible for pulling the toes out. So they're going to be on the lateral side of the metatarsals, and they're basically just going to insert onto the lateral sides of these toes so that when they contract, the toes get pulled outwards. Okay, so that's abduction and adduction of the toes. But live long and prosper is meant to get you thinking abduction, adduction. If you know that abduction and adduction of the fingers is the interossei muscles of the hand, palmar and dorsal, the foot is exactly the same except it's plantar and dorsal, and it's still dab the pad. Yeah, dorsal for abduction, plantar for adduction. Okay. I hope that was useful. I hope that's made sense. Oh, and just a quick, final note on the innervation of those 4 layers. So they're all innervated by your plantar nerves. Yeah, they're plantar muscles, so they're innervated by the plantar nerves. Yeah, you've got a medial plantar nerve and a lateral plantar nerve. Both of those are branches of the tibial nerve. Yeah, if you remember, the tibial nerve is the nerve that innervates the posterior leg. So it goes down the back of the leg and then underneath the medial malleolus of the ankle to then get underneath the foot and split into those plantar nerves. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So just be very clear, your dorsal intrinsic muscles are all innervated by the deep fibular nerve because it's effectively part of the anterior compartment of the leg. Yeah, your plantar muscles are all innervated by the plantar nerves, which are branches of the tibial nerve. Yeah, and I think I'll do another video where we just look at the whole schematic of all of the nerves of the lower limb, because that might be quite useful. But I'm not going to do that now. We'll do that another time. Okay, cool. Okay, folks, that's the end of that one. Yeah, that's quite a fiddly one. I would say don't worry too much if that was a hard watch, because yeah, they're really quite difficult. You only, I would say, really have an awareness that the muscles exist. Have an awareness that you can figure out the names of these muscles based on their location, based on their action and things like that. And if it does help anyone, that idea of breaking the layers up into sort of into their layers and coming up with ways of remembering them, I hope that was useful for people. Yeah, thanks very much for watching. I think I've done all of the muscles of the lower limb now. Yeah, I've done them all. So, yeah, I hope it's been useful. As ever, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy me, please subscribe to the channel. And if you've got any feedback, good, bad, or otherwise, please pop it in the comments below. All the best, guys, and hopefully see you in the next one. Have a good day. See you later.